There we go.
Welcome,
Hello,
everyone.
everyone.
Welcome to the Thriving Marriage High Thrive Live. We are delighted and excited to be here. Mark, I'm going to give you a name. There you go. This is Mark Johnston, our international marriage expert and coach. And I am Heather Choate, our international mindset expert and coach. We are excited to talk about something today. And it's funny because we came up with a new word. I'll get into that in a minute. But our topic that we're going to be really going deep over the next several in like a series is Save Your Marriage on Your Own. What we're going to talk about first today is we created a program, Mark and I did, and the first phase, we call it recoupling. Okay, that's kind of our trademark phrase for this process of when your spouse is checked out of your marriage, how do you come back together as a couple? So as Mark and I were preparing for this live stream, I sent him a message about it and I put a typo and called it decoupling. Therefore, a brand new word has been born into the English language. And today we are going to specifically talk about decoupling. Mark, what does decoupling mean?
Yeah, so I thought that was funny. I mean, here I was preparing this, the topic, and I was like, oh, okay, Heather wants to talk about decoupling. That's fine. We can talk about that thing. And it's just a word, sure, why not? But yeah, we will actually get to some of the recoupling principles in other weeks. I mean, this is all part of the process. But as far as decoupling, I mean, this is essentially the process that, what happens as couples come apart. And I do think this is an important thing to understand, simply because, if you don't know how you came apart, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to come back together. I mean, it's also important to know so that you can avoid some of these things in the future, or if you haven't even gotten too far into this process, you know how to put a stop to it. So yeah, decoupling, like I said, it's all about how a couple comes apart, and we're excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, so if you like that word, leave a comment, give us a thumbs up. Decoupling. We just added it to the English language.
I don't know. Is it a made-up word? I feel like it makes sense to me.
Totally a thing.
We'll just assume it is.
A typo turned into a real word. So, okay. So here we have oftentimes when a relationship is falling apart and someone's like, I don't even know how we got here, right? How did things even get to this point? And sometimes they get a really big wake-up call when their spouse comes to them and says, I want a divorce, I want to separate, I want to sleep in the other room. Or maybe they don't even say it, but they just start to exhibit some behaviors that show that they're really pulling away from the marriage. Why does this happen? What causes the breakdown in the relationship?
That's a great question, because I hear that comment all the time. People all the time are saying, I have no idea how it came to this. Like, it was just a surprise. Surprise, my spouse doesn't want to be in the marriage anymore. And I would say the absolute most common thing that happens is there is inability or lack of hope that things could be different, or an inability to actually resolve concerns. So one spouse feels like they keep bringing up a topic over and over, or they feel like they can't even bring it up, and those concerns never get resolved. So whether this is feeling disrespected, or feeling like they're not valued, or not really feeling connected anymore, or not really feeling that love anymore, at some point, I'm guessing in most couples, the person who's unhappy makes some attempts at bringing this up and resolving it. Most of the time, though, those attempts are fruitless. They just don't work, and it gets ignored, and frustration and resentment builds up. And this absolutely is going to eventually lead to the breakdown of the marriage. That right there.
So this is basically where you have concerns, but there are things that, for whatever reason, they're unable to be resolved. They're not talked about. They're not worked through. What happens instead? So if you can't work out something, what tends to happen in the relationship?
So what I tend to see is people try a few different methods at this. They tend to they might downplay the concerns. Oh, it's not that big of a deal. If we can't connect right now, there's probably something we'll take care of it another time. They'll ignore it is one thing. So other people, they might get defensive. Your spouse comes to you and they say, I'm unhappy, and people fight back, and they bite back. Well, maybe if you didn't do this, this, or this, maybe you wouldn't be like this, or we wouldn't be like this. We wouldn't be having these arguments, and they might shift the blame instead. I don't think it's necessarily, well, I mean, yes, in the long run, it's important to identify why you can't resolve your concerns, but just the mere fact that you can't resolve them is the big factor here. There's going to be a little bit of a different approach depending on, what the specific obstacle is, whether that's defensiveness, whether there's, stonewalling and silence, whether there's hostility, whether there's just whatever. There's different approaches to fix those problems, but ultimately it's leading back to the ability to get into this a cycle here where you're actually taking a problem and solving it together as a couple so that you can be happy.
Right. Now let's talk about what happens when issues are swept under the rug. It's something that both partners, they don't go there. They just continue to kind of push it aside. What does that look like? And how does that lead to the marriage kind of falling apart?
Sure. I think a lot of people do this, even to a certain extent in healthy, fairly healthy relationships. I mean, to a certain extent, like even my wife and I, there are certain things that might be brought up at times, and we just kind of unconsciously say, okay, well, doesn't really need my attention right now. And we just kind of brush it aside. We'll say, we'll take care of this later. There's a certain tipping point when, when the so-called, the metaphorical rug here, it just gets, there's so much swept under there that it just all spills out. And
yes.
So like a little bit of this isn't really necessarily damaging. It's just when this is a consistent pattern, when nothing is getting resolved or hardly anything. And this is going to be different from couple to couple. Most couples, for the most part, if most interactions are good and you guys are solving most problems, then it can stand a little, hiding a little bit of this dust under the rug, so to speak, this garbage under the rug. It's when, like I said, when all that gets to the point where there's resentment building up and unhappiness. And the key point here is when hope starts to get lost that things could be different. And that's really the turning point, is when someone in the couple is starting to say, my marriage is an obstacle to what I want, is right. When you really are going to start getting a lot of resistance to any amount of investment within the marriage.
That is exactly right. Mark, I'm hearing it.
What?
I was hearing it echo. Anyway. Oh. So what you just illustrated here is that there's kind of this sweeping issues under the rug, an inability to resolve issues, and it gets to this tipping point. And that tipping point is when the marriage itself is seen as an obstacle to their happiness, mm-hmm. right? And what do most people do when they get to a major obstacle with anything, especially your happiness? You either want to remove the obstacle or you want to get around it. And how this shows up is that they start checking out, they want to get a divorce, they want to separate. But like Mark said, and this is exactly what brings us here to saving your marriage on your own, is that if your marriage has reached this tipping point where your partner has gone over that point and has lost the hope of being happy with you again, then it's a really crucial time to learn what you need to do. And first of all, the most important thing to recognize is that you have to be willing to go first. Right, Mark?
Absolutely. So yeah, I do think. Oh, go ahead. I do think there are a couple things that you can really do, that you can really focus on when this is happening to to start turning that around, when that hope is lost. I mean, these are things that I think at any point in a relationship would be useful. I mean, we can go over that now. I don't know if I was interrupting a flow of thought there with you, Heather. But anyways, these are what I call like the building blocks of trust, of openness, of really any amount of comfort within a relationship, which is absolutely critical at that sort of stage, this sort of junction. So the building blocks here are acceptance, appreciation, and openness. So basically, if someone is approaching the relationship and they're feeling judged, if they're feeling like there's a lot of blame, if there's feeling like there's shame or guilt or anything negative, or just judgment, like I said, a lack of acceptance, it's not, they're going to be conditioned to approach their relationship less and less. People want to be accepted. And if they're saying, hey, I'm having trouble in the relationship, and their partner is getting angry at that, it's all the more likely that that person's going to step back. The appreciation, more than just being accepted, people, the reason why we step into these relationships, why they are maintained, is because at some level it's rewarding. I go to, I make a conscious effort to take time to be with my wife because I know that it's rewarding for me. And part of that is I know that she appreciates that time together, and I appreciate her. It's this a little bit of this reciprocation here. But if instead I wasn't sure whether my wife enjoyed being around me, or vice versa, and there's just kind of a lot of uncertainty, it would be less rewarding, less likely for me to invest in that relationship. And then that third factor is, if I'm going to build up this comfort and connection here, I should actually be open myself, set the precedent, and kind of share my feelings in such a way that even if they're negative, share them in such a way that it's going in a positive direction, but still not holding things back. If we go back to what breaks it down, things are broken down because things get swept under the rug. In other words, they're not accepted. The other person's opinion isn't appreciated, or an opinion isn't even shared in the first place. The opposite of these building blocks here.
Yeah, very good. So if you have a question about this for any of our live viewers, or if you're watching the replay later, you can drop a comment here, and we love to go through and help you guys out with your specific situations to help apply some of these principles. They are high level, and so understanding how it relates to you and your specific situation can be incredibly valuable. So go ahead and leave a comment here as we have a few more minutes here to talk with you guys. So Mark, let's talk about how when a relationship has hit that tipping point, the spouse, the partner, no longer wants to work on things okay, so you talked about the 3 pillars of what you need to do. But first, what we have to understand is that you must be willing to do those things first and not wait for your partner to get on board to do those things. Absolutely. That is one of the biggest crucial mistakes that we see people make, is that they feel that, and this goes back to our conversation from a couple weeks ago. If you didn't see that live stream, then please go ahead and check that out. The commitment versus comfort, that because you've made a commitment that your partner should do these things, okay? Because of honor and commitment and all these things. What you have to understand is that they've already gone over that tipping point, and they no longer have hope of being happy with you. And so that commitment doesn't hold, unfortunately, the same weight. And so if you want to save your marriage, which is why you are here, and you do, then you have to be the brave one, being willing to go first, to start to make things safe and comfortable in your relationship, so that then your spouse can see the possibility of being happy with you again. Once they see the possibility of being happy with you again, you can work on addressing some of those issues that were being swept under the rug by restoring trust and rebuilding the relationship. All of these things must be done in the right order, okay? So first mistake, demanding that your spouse work on it with you. That's only going to push them further away because they've already gone over that point, that tipping point, and they don't want to work on it. They don't see the hope of it happening. Okay. So you have to be willing to go first. You have to be brave, and you have to understand that for a time, you're going to be the one working on it, and your partner's not going to be there with you. And that's one of the most, courageous things that you can do, but it will have incredible benefits for you and your relationship. And we've seen literally hundreds of relationships turn around from those that are willing to go first. That's why we title this Save Your Marriage on Your Own, because you have to be willing to go first. Okay. And then, oh no, now I lost my second point. Do you remember what my second point was, Mark?
I can illustrate this whole situation with an example of,
Yes,
what.
Please.
Okay. So I can recall, it's interesting being in this sort of profession. I remember some close friends of mine were actually going through a divorce, and I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I know how to help these people, but being close friends, it's kind of it's a different sort of situation. But I'll say, everything about their relationship for a long time, I always thought of them as this great couple, and it was a surprise to me when they kind of told me that they're having a lot of trouble thinking about getting a divorce. Even as much as they said, okay, they weren't going to really come to me for help, inevitably they were talking to me about what was going on. And I know the wife in this case, we'll call, change the names here, we'll call her Melissa, and husband Matt. So Melissa started sharing some of her struggles. She really dealt with a lot of like depressive symptoms, and just right off the bat, over time that started to wear on Matt, and he started to break things down. He wasn't really being that accepting. Now, over time, after a while, he started having some feelings for a coworker, which, Melissa was furious about it. She was really upset. Once again, not really being understanding or accepting. Now, I'm not saying that people need to condone that sort of action, but even still, it's approaching the relationship and feeling judged has a little bit of an effect of driving people away. There's right ways of approaching this sort of topic. I don't want to digress into that. So what ended up happening is he felt that she was constantly negative and complaining, and while she felt misunderstood, and these basic principles just were thrown out the door, and the resentment from both of these issues just kept building up. And what ended up happening is it got to the point where they both kind of lost the hope, and they started rejecting any sort of efforts towards being nice towards each other. So efforts were made like to try to fix things, and the other person would be like, well, they're just trying to manipulate me. And so once again, that acceptance or that appreciation just wasn't there. And in the end, she ended up saying, he's an obstacle to my happiness. She ended up kicking him out, and because she was saying, okay, it's not going to get better. He's making me miserable. And he viewed her as an obstacle to being able to socialize and have meaningful relationships with other people. And it just broke down from there. Whereas if we go way back to the beginning, and here she is, she's sharing her struggles. And if that was really accepted and there's an attempt to understand that, if it was appreciated that she was coming to him for some help, that would have changed a lot of things. Or even still, if he was saying, I'm unhappy, and oddly enough, I'm struggling because I'm starting to have these feelings for a coworker. And if that was understood and they dealt with that together, and it was appreciated that he came to her for some support, it would have changed a lot in the situation. But anyway, so that's, I like these principles because it works on so many levels, whether people are really struggling or, I try to keep these things in mind in my own marriage to make sure that everyone's happy. It really works wonders.
Absolutely. So we have two really great comments here. One is, and we don't see the names here, so that's okay. But one is asking if this would be good to share with your spouse. Divorce was filed back in November, okay, but nothing else been happening. She's willing to listen, but at the same time starts feeling pressured. And at this point, when she feels that way, she shuts down and she doesn't want to work it out. This is a perfect example of what not to do, okay? Is that every time you, okay, bottom line, you're not ready to share this video, okay, with her, because then she's going to feel pressured and she's going to withdraw and shut down. Okay, it's the same pattern that we see here. So
it goes back to that comfort versus commitment that you were mentioning exactly. From the other week. Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly. So there are some basic principles here that need to be understood and how to properly reconnect with your spouse. So you said she's open, which is a really good and hopeful sign. That means there is a door and a window opportunity here. However, what you need to do is use that opportunity in the best and most effective way, in a way that draws her to you rather than pushes her away. I just posted yesterday the push versus pull method that Mark and I teach, and we will go specifically into that probably next week on our live stream about recoupling, going a little bit deeper into that. There's things that you do that push your spouse away versus things that pull them to you very naturally and easily, like a magnet, and all that tension is gone. So that's exactly what we would encourage you to do, is to learn some of these principles, go through our 5 shifts to save your marriage. We have a free live training about that, and that will really give you a solid foundation, and then we can go deeper from there. The other question here is, what do you do when one spouse sweeps something as an emotional affair under the rug? How do you start to trust again? Okay, so that's a really big thing to sweep under the rug, a huge emotional affair. How do you start to trust again? All right, now let's talk about solving problems in the right order here, right? We want to make sure that we're not solving problems in the wrong order, because that's only going to make situations worse. Mark, what do you recommend as far as solving
factors at play here that I'd be looking for? Like, how much does this spouse that had the emotional affair, how much do they want to be in a marriage? Because that would determine a lot of what you do with this sort of situation. But I'm going to assume that this spouse is still wanting to be in the marriage. Otherwise, we wouldn't get a comment like this. And absolutely, something like this, I'll tell you, from the perspective of the spouse who had the affair, it's so much easier just to ignore it and move on, because confronting this directly there's going to be a lot of shame and guilt just naturally in this situation. But if you want to address it directly, here are these principles. When I talk about acceptance, I'm talking about acceptance of a person rather than their actions. Whereas Heather and I don't normally bring in a lot of religion into a situation like this. The best example, I share this sometimes, the best example I can think of is from the New Testament, the story of the woman who was caught in adultery, brought before Jesus, and how this way he handled this was in such a way that he really accepted her as a person, even if he didn't really accept what she did. And this is the same sort of idea with like an emotional affair. If he's coming to you and there's all this, I'm so upset with you, I'm so angry with you, how could you do this to me? What's the likelihood that he's going to continue to want to talk about it? Next to nothing. Not to say that you say, you know what, it's so great that you had this affair. No, not at all like that. Because there needs to be certain boundaries, there needs to be certain lines within the marriage. It's the approach is more like, I'm glad that you shared this with me. I'm glad that we can talk about this. What are we going to do about it now? Is going to be much more productive than, you got to fix this. This is such a terrible thing that you did. How could you do this to me? There's a little bit of contrast there.
Yeah, just a little bit of contrast. Absolutely. So thanks, Mark, for sharing that. That's beautiful. Now, let's just kind of do a recap here of what we're talking about. So decoupling occurs when, these different obstacles come in the relationship. Things start to deteriorate over time due to a lack of being able to resolve issues, sweeping them under the rug, right? And the turning point comes when your spouse no longer sees the possibility of being happy with you, and the marriage actually becomes like an obstacle to their happiness. At this point, it is crucial that you be the one willing to go first, not wait for your partner, your spouse to get on board. That is the number one most important thing that you have to realize, is that you have to go first. And then start to work on some of these things like Mark mentioned to make things feel safe and comfortable. He talked about the building blocks of trust, of connection and openness. And that comes by understanding your spouse first. So Mark, let's wrap this up and let's give everyone an action step, something actionable that they can do. And then we would like you all to report back on how you do on this.
Great. I would love to hear how people, I'd love people to take these principles, these building blocks of acceptance and appreciation and openness, and see what they can do with it in their own marriage. And I want you to really focus in on that for a few conversations and report back in the group how that affected those conversations. So just to you're leaving out any judgment or blame. You're showing signs that you really appreciate being around your spouse and that you appreciate them sharing with you, them being with you, whatever. And you're being open in a positive way about your feelings. So even if you're sharing something negative, you're taking it in a direction where you would like it to go. Take those principles, go and interact with your husband or wife, talk about it here. We'd love to hear how that goes. And, you know, if any of you guys have these principles down, please give other people some feedback on their stories. This is what the group is all about.
Absolutely. So if you guys are up for the challenge, leave a comment here, say I'm all in, and go ahead and apply those things to your relationship, and then post in the group about your experiences, because accountability is key. Awesome, Mark. Thank you so much for helping us out here today on our Save Your Marriage on Your Own, talking about decoupling and the first steps to recoupling. And next week, we will talk about the push versus pull method and go deeper in how to make things safe and comfortable for your spouse so that they are craving to come back to you again. Awesome. Thanks, Mark. And we'll talk to you all soon.
Hey,